Okay, so in this one, I want to go ahead and continue and finish doing a lot of the baseline stuff. So you'll notice that if you look at this, we've got paragraph sitting on top of paragraph, and you can't really see where they end and start. You've got unordered list items that you can't tell the difference really between ordered list items. This is a block quote, but it looks just like a paragraph. Down here, this is pretext, looks the same, and so on and so on. So, and then we've got definition lists. So what I want to do is, instead of making you watch me type all of this stuff, I'm going to paste some stuff in here. I kind of work some things out, and then I want to explain to you what those decisions were all about. So the first thing I'm going to do is go not into the media query, but instead I'm going to go into the general area for the general section rules, and I'm going to come down and I'm going to go ahead and hit paste. So first of all, this is first thing I'm going to do, and this is a grouped selector. All right, set where I've got a whole bunch of selectors that are comma separated, and I'm just applying the same property and value to all of them so that they all have the same thing. And before, I had decided that I think 1.5M worked pretty well to separate the articles. So it might also then go to say that the things that, the elements in between should also maybe have that too. So let's just do a save on that really quickly, and let's do a refresh on the page, and you can see all of a sudden now I can see the difference of where a paragraph ends, where an unordered list starts and ends, and so on, right? So we've got some new separations of space. Oh, the other thing I want to point out too is that, remember we had a border here before? And it's not there, but if I go here, it is there. So one of the things that I did that was problematic in the last video is that I put the border so that it was only showing up inside of the media query. So if we wanted to fix that, we would need to do something that's a section article that has this border. Let's take this, we'll cut this out. Okay, and we're going to come back up here, and we're going to find that article, and we're going to add the border inside of the mobile rules. Save it, hit refresh, and then now you can see that we have a border in the mobile view as well as the desktop view. Okay, so you can start to see how this is taking shape, even just with like the most minor changes. Okay, so let me come back into this article, or excuse me, into the style sheet, and I'm going to make sure that I am not in a media query. Let me actually give it a little bit more separation. And just below the thing that I just wrote, where I've got all of these things for like P and UL and so on, I also am going to paste some more stuff. But before I do that, just to kind of help me keep things straight, what I'm going to do is make some little sub comments in here. So let's do this, like we'll say article header, for instance. All right. Okay, and anything that pertains to the article header, like header H1, H2, will go there. And then down below, let's do sort of, we'll do miscellany article elements. Okay, and then this way, we can just kind of keep some of this a little bit straight. It might be a little bit easier to kind of tell what we're doing. We'll even give this like a visual separation. Okay, and so now what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and paste a whole bunch of stuff, and I'm going to go over it. So some of the HTML markup that I had was, I had an aside that was going in the articles in the main content area. We had unordered lists, we had ordered lists, we had definition lists. Part of definition lists are also definition terms, definition data, and there's a block quote, and there was pre. There are other things that you would need to come back in here and put more styles for, like you would need to definitely style image tags, and you might need to style some other things too, like if you wanted to style, I think somewhere in there I've got code as a tag, you could style that. Lots of different things, okay? But let's just get started here, and I'm going to go through these, and you'll see if I save this, let's do a refresh. And you see, okay, one of the things I did was I put bullets on the bullets on the unordered lists, and I made them the disk style. And if you wanted to see what that looked like, they're like right here. Actually, I'm sorry, not the disk style, it's a circle style. So I gave it a list style type of circle, gave it a left margin of 7%. Ordered list is the same, except for this, I gave it a decimal style for the numeral type. And then if you wanted to, take a scroll down, you would see the block quote. I changed it so that it's in italics. Let's take a peek right here. We've got font style as an italic, and we have margin all the way around as 2M, so it is inset. So that's good. Yeah. And if you wanted, the other thing that you could do is you could, in addition to doing 2M all the way around, if you wanted to, you could have also set like a width and done margin auto. That's another thing you could have done. I also did pre-tag, so that the pre-tag now has a color of purple. You could do a lot of different things with this. Now, one of the things you will notice on pre is if I scroll down, actually, let's do this. Oops, let's do an inspector, sorry. There we go. Okay, so if we go to inspect this, one of the things I'm going to do here is I'll dock it on the right. And you'll notice in this case, see how the pretext gets cut off? So if you had really long pretext, then it would get cut off. So if that was something that you felt strongly about, you could put it inside of a div or something, and then you could force a scroll bar on the div, sort of like what some people will do, like say with code, for instance. Anyway, the other thing too that you'll notice is that I styled this aside. Here, I styled the aside in such a way that it's got a border around it that's similar to the dotted line on the rule. And you'll notice the aside just keeps getting bigger on all the pages. The other thing too, or on the entire page, the other thing is that I did style the definition list. So for a DL, for definition list, I made sure that the font weight was 100. And then a definition term, I decided that I wanted the font weight to be heavier, so I made it a 400, so it was sort of bolder looking, and I made it italic, right, so that it stood out that way too. All right, so, and then for the definition data, I just allowed that to stay at the normal 300 weight, so it just inherits it. I gave it a left margin so that it's inset, okay, and yeah, so it's really pretty straightforward. You can go in and style your different things in a lot of different ways, but I just wanted to kind of go over that, and it's amazing how just a little bit of styling, just a modicum of rules, actually makes a huge difference in how well the thing is readable. One thing you might want to take a peek at is this aside. Generally, an aside is literally something that is just that. It is an element that is kind of off to the side. It doesn't visually have to be off to the side, but it's kind of like supplemental information, okay? But if you wanted to literally set it off to the side, let's do an inspector element thing. All right, so if we go to inspect it, we can actually go ahead and make a change here. If we wanted to just see what it looked like, I'm not going to do a media query just yet, but let's open it up so that we can see what it would look like if we needed a media query. So here, let's go ahead and say float right, for instance. And okay, so it floats right. That's kind of handy. And then the other thing is that if it did float right, we'd probably want to give it a margin. Okay, so we could do something like that where we say margin or padding. We've already got padding on it. So maybe margin left could be like 1.5M, something like that. I don't know. Maybe it doesn't have to be that much. So that when it starts to get close to things, it doesn't sit right on top of them, it bumps them down. Right, so that's an option. You could also see what it looks like if you did a float left on it. And then that's a little bit different. You would want to change the margin so that it's right margin. But I think that I like it as a floated, right floated object. And the other thing too is that it's going to change depending on how much content is in it. So if you wanted to tell it exactly how wide to be, you could. So if we were to just test that hypothesis, and we could come up here in the actual HTML, and I can say edit as HTML, and then I could just kind of mess around with this where I copy this and I paste it and I paste it and I paste it and I paste it. So we've got something that's really long. All right, and then whenever we click that, you see that the aside wants to take up more space now, and the reason is because we didn't tell it how wide to be. So if I wanted to come back down here now, I could tell it to have a width of like 50%, for instance, and it would automatically go and take up half the space. So you could tell the aside how wide you wanted it to be. You could tell it to be 40%, right? And then you see that it sort of does this thing where it starts to break down a little bit. And if you wanted to address that, then remember what I said before about floats and their parents. All right, so now the aside is a floated child element inside of its parent article. So what you would also have to do then in the article is that you would have to come into the article and you would have to tell it to have overflow, overflow of hidden, and then it gets fixed, okay? So you have to kind of also be careful if you want to make an aside, if you think it's going to be a really long aside, then you've got to make sure that it's sitting next to adequate amount of content. Otherwise, you know, you might end up with a problem, okay? So that's just something to keep in consideration, so that it, so that it ends up looking okay. So let's take a look at that again. If we go back to this aside, these are the things that we adjusted. We made float right, margin left, and width of 40%. Those were the things that we adjusted. So if we wanted to maybe copy these elements, let's copy that. And we can jump back into Dreamweaver. And this we need to do in not the mobile view, right? We need to actually go down here in underneath article stuff, and we can go and we can say section, article, and then aside, so that it's the asides that are inside the articles, inside the sections. And then I can just paste that stuff that I had copied from my inspector view, and let's save that. Now the other thing too, if you remember, is that inside of the media query, where I'm going to have that floated element, then I also need to say section article has an overflow. Remember, we talked about this, of hidden, so that that floated aside would still look good. So let's just save that and let's make sure that it ended up looking okay. And of course, it got rid of all of the other stuff that I had typed in there. So if you wanted to just double check and make sure, you could actually come into your source code and we can copy some lorem ipsum, let's say maybe to that amount, and then we'll find where the aside is that we left in here. Yeah, right here. So we'll say this is an aside element, and then we can just paste that. Let's save it, and then we can do a little test and see that it looks okay still. Whenever we start to do this, and it collapses, it's going to be okay. The other thing that you could do too, right now it's next to definition. So the other thing that you could do is you could make a copy of this aside and see what happens whenever you just put it up here. Maybe let's find maybe next to this paragraph. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Let's do a refresh, and then you can see here how that behaves. It floats next to the lists, right? So you can play around with this however you want, and it sort of will behave in different ways depending on how you choose to style it, but it's just an option. And then you can see it goes to a full width here in the mobile view. Okay, so in the next video, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to start styling the footer so that we can wrap this initial template part up.